The rain never stopped on Okinawa. It fell in sheets that turned dirt into sucking mud, and jungle trails into rivers of brown despair. Every day smelled of salt, smoke, and death. By April 1945, the island had become the bloodiest battleground of the Pacific, where American and Japanese soldiers fought not for ground, but for survival itself. Private First Class James Carter, a 23-year-old farm boy from Kansas, had been fighting for 63 days. His uniform was a patchwork of dirt and sweat, his helmet dented by shrapnel, and his M1 Garand carried more scratches than the rifle he trained with back home. He'd learned to stop counting the days and start counting the breaths that came between shell explosions. Next to him, crouched behind a mound of broken coral, was his best friend, Corporal Daniel "Danny" Ruiz, a Mexican-American from San Antonio, Texas. Danny was loud, funny, and the best shot in the unit. He could hit a tin can from 50 yards even when half asleep. Together, they'd been through Saipan and Peleliu, watching friends die one by one. But this was different. Okinawa wasn't a battle. It was a nightmare carved into the earth. That morning, their platoon, Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, had been ordered to clear a network of caves near Shuri Ridge. The enemy was dug in, invisible, and waiting. "Keep your heads low and your hearts high," their sergeant, Tom Braddock, had said before they moved out. But within an hour, mortar shells rained down like the wrath of heaven. The air filled with dust and screams. The jungle caught fire. Carter and Danny got separated from their squad during the chaos. 1 minute, they were advancing through the trees. The next, the ground exploded beneath them. When Carter regained his senses, his ears rang like church bells, and smoke blinded him. Danny was on the ground beside him, his leg shredded by shrapnel, bleeding fast. "Jimmy, I can't feel my leg," Danny gasped, gripping his thigh. Carter dropped to his knees. "Hold on, I got you," he said, pressing a field dressing against the wound. His hands were trembling. He could barely hear his own voice over the ringing in his skull. Machine gun fire crackled in the distance. The rest of the platoon had fallen back toward the ridge. The Japanese were counterattacking. Carter looked around. He and Danny were surrounded by jungle, smoke, and death. The only way back was through a line of enemy fire. Danny gritted his teeth. Go without me," he muttered. "You'll die if you stay." Carter shook his head. "Not a damn chance." He tore open his canteen, poured water into Danny's mouth, and began to drag him toward cover. Each inch felt like a mile. Bullets sliced through leaves overhead. The mud sucked at his boots. He didn't care. All he could think about was keeping Danny alive. They reached the edge of a burned-out rice terrace and collapsed behind a fallen palm tree. Danny's face was pale, eyes glassy with pain. The bleeding wouldn't stop. Carter ripped his own sleeve, tied it above the wound, and whispered, "You're not dying here, brother." Danny managed a faint grin. "You always were too stubborn." Carter loaded his rifle and stared into the smoky tree line. The Japanese soldiers were closing in. He could hear their voices, their footsteps crunching on wet soil. He counted at least 5, maybe more. He'd have to hold them off until dark. He took a deep breath, aimed, and squeezed the trigger. One enemy soldier dropped, another dove for cover. The jungle erupted in gunfire. Carter kept firing, reloading, firing again. Every shot was for Danny. Every pull of the trigger was another second of life. When the shooting finally stopped, the jungle went quiet again. Unnaturally quiet. Carter waited, chest heaving, heart hammering. His ammo was nearly gone. Danny was unconscious now, his head resting against Carter's shoulder. He was burning with fever. Night fell. The rain came back harder than ever, pounding the leaves, washing the blood into the earth. Carter dragged Danny deeper into the jungle, searching for shelter. Finally, he found a small cave hidden by vines. He carried Danny inside and set him down gently. He tore open his last medical kit. His hands moved mechanically. Clean the wound, rewrap, check pulse. He whispered to keep himself from losing focus. You're gonna make it, Danny. Just hang on. We're Marines. We don't quit. He used his bayonet to carve a small drainage trench in the cave floor to keep the rainwater out. Then he sat beside his friend all night, listening to the thunder and the distant explosions. Each flash of lightning illuminated the battlefield outside like a glimpse of hell. When dawn came, Carter decided to move. He couldn't stay hidden forever. They were cut off, low on food, and the radio was dead. But the thought of leaving Danny was unthinkable. "If I can't carry you home," he whispered, "then I'll die trying." He fashioned a makeshift stretcher out of bamboo and his poncho. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He slung his rifle across his back, lifted Danny onto the stretcher, and started dragging him through the mud. For hours, Carter crawled and stumbled through the jungle, inching toward the ridge where he believed the Marines still held their line. He used the sound of American artillery as his compass. Every step was agony. His shoulders screamed, his legs buckled, but he didn't stop. By midday, he spotted movement ahead. Not friendlies, but Japanese scouts. He froze. 3 soldiers, rifles slung, scanning the trees. Carter ducked into the undergrowth, heart racing. If they found him, it was over. He reached for his knife. The rain masked his breathing. As one of the scouts passed by, Carter lunged. It was silent, brutal, and over in seconds. He dragged the bodies out of sight, trembling, guilt and survival warring in his chest. "I'm sorry," he whispered, not to them, but to himself. That night, as he huddled beside Danny's stretcher, he heard a faint voice through the rain. "Carter." "You still there?" Danny's voice was barely a whisper. "Yeah, buddy." "Still here," Danny smiled weakly. "You're a terrible singer, you know that?" "But I could use a song right now," Carter chuckled softly. "Ain't no way I'm singing out here. We'd have every Jap on the island hunting us down." Danny laughed. A small, fragile sound that somehow made the night less dark. For 2 more days, Carter carried his wounded friend through enemy territory. He scavenged rainwater, stole rations from an abandoned bunker, and dodged patrols. Sleep was a luxury. Hope was the only thing that kept him upright. By the time they reached the outskirts of American lines, Carter was running on fumes. His vision blurred. His body was failing. But when he saw the faint shape of a U.S. flag fluttering above a sandbag post, he pushed harder. When he stumbled out of the jungle, dragging the stretcher, 2 Marines pointed rifles at him. "Holy hell!" one of them shouted. "It's Carter! We thought you were dead!" Carter collapsed beside Danny, gasping for air. "Not yet," he muttered. "But he needs a medic." "Now!" Medics rushed forward. They lifted Danny off the stretcher and carried him toward the aid station. Carter tried to stand, but his legs gave out. The last thing he saw before blacking out was Danny's hand reaching toward him. The first thing Carter felt when he woke up was the steady hum of distant artillery. Faint, rhythmic, almost comforting after the chaos of the last few days. His body ached everywhere, his throat dry, and his hands were blistered from dragging Danny's stretcher through miles of jungle mud. He blinked slowly. The world came back into focus. A canvas tent, olive drab cots lined in rows, the smell of disinfectant and sweat. Medics moved quietly between the wounded, checking bandages, whispering prayers, and swapping IV bags. He tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness hit him. A nurse hurried over. "Easy, Marine," she said softly. "You've been out for 2 days. Where's Ruiz?" Carter's voice was rough, barely a whisper. She smiled faintly. "Your friend's alive. They operated on his leg. It was bad, but he's stable." "You saved his life." Carter let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Relief washed through him like sunlight after rain. "Can I see him?" "In a bit," she said. "You need rest first. You've got burns, dehydration, and a cracked rib. You're lucky to be alive yourself." "Yeah," Carter muttered, sinking back into the cot. "Luck's been chasing me all war." For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to close his eyes without fear. The war still raged outside, but for this brief moment he felt peace. Fragile, temporary, but real. 2 days later, Carter limped across the makeshift camp toward the medical tent. The sun was high, but the air was still heavy with the scent of smoke and cordite. The battle for Okinawa had turned into a slow, grinding nightmare. Hill by hill, cave by cave. Even as Carter walked, he could hear distant explosions echoing through the ridges. Inside the tent, Danny lay on a cot, his leg wrapped in layers of gauze and splints. His face was pale but alive. When he saw Carter, he broke into a grin. "Well, look who crawled out of hell," Danny rasped. Carter smirked. "Couldn't let you have all the fun, could I?" Danny chuckled weakly. "You should have left me, Jimmy. You could have died out there." Carter pulled up a crate and sat beside him. "Yeah, well, you would have done the same for me." Danny's smile faded into something softer, more serious. "Maybe, but I don't think I would have made it." Carter shrugged. "You didn't have to. I made it for both of us." For a long moment, they sat in silence, listening to the rain drumming against the canvas roof. Outside, trucks rumbled, boots splashed through mud, and the distant whine of artillery shells reminded them that the war hadn't ended yet. Danny turned his head toward him. "When this is over, what's the first thing you're going to do?" Carter thought about it. "Sleep in a real bed. Maybe see a cornfield again." Danny smiled faintly. "Me? I'm going to dance with Maria till sunrise. Your girl back home?" "Yeah," Danny said softly. "She writes me every week. Says she's saving a spot on the porch swing." Carter grinned. "You better not keep her waiting." "I won't," Danny said. Then, after a pause, "Thanks for not leaving me." Carter looked down, uncomfortable with the weight of gratitude. "You'd have done the same." "Maybe," Danny said again, voice barely audible. "But you did it. That's what matters." The weeks passed. The 1st Battalion rotated between combat and rest, pushing deeper into the island. Carter was reassigned to a supply detail while he recovered, running rations and ammo to the front lines. Every morning, he checked on Danny. By June, the Battle of Okinawa was nearly over. The island was a ruin. Burned forests, shattered villages, and cliffs scarred by months of shelling. Tens of thousands were dead on both sides. The cost was unimaginable. One humid afternoon, Sergeant Braddock called Carter into the command tent. "Sit down, Carter," the sergeant said. "Got some news." Carter sat, wary. "Good or bad?" "Bit of both." Braddock rubbed the back of his neck. Command reviewed the reports. "That stunt you pulled, dragging Ruiz out of enemy territory, killing 3 enemy scouts, calling off patrols. They're putting you up for the Silver Star." Carter blinked. "Sir, I was just doing my job." Braddock snorted. "That's what heroes always say. You did more than your job, son. You saved one of ours, and maybe yourself, too. They don't hand those stars out for nothing." Carter shifted uneasily. "Danny's the real hero." He took the shrapnel. Braddock leaned forward. "He's alive because you refused to leave him. Remember that." Carter said nothing. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired. Soul-deep tired. The kind that no medal could fix. When the fighting finally ended in June, Okinawa was declared secure. The men of Charlie Company lined up in formation beneath a tattered flag. The ceremony was brief. The war still loomed, and rumors of an invasion of Japan whispered through the ranks. When his name was called, Carter stepped forward. The battalion commander pinned the small silver star to his chest. Cameras flashed, though Carter barely noticed. He looked out over the sea of faces, all young, all weathered, all carrying ghosts. As the commander shook his hand, he said quietly, "You did what most wouldn't have dared. Don't ever forget that." Carter nodded politely, saluted, and walked away. Danny watched from a wheelchair, clapping slowly, pride shining through the pain in his eyes. When Carter approached, Danny grinned. "About damn time they gave you something shiny." Carter smirked. "You want it? It'll look better on your uniform, Danny shook his head. Nah, you earned it, brother. Keep it. In July, they were shipped back to Guam for rest and recovery. The war in Europe was over, but the Pacific still burned. Carter and Danny spent their days under palm trees, swapping stories with other Marines, pretending the war was far away. One night, as the sun set over the ocean, Danny said quietly, "You think we'll ever be the same again?" Carter didn't answer right away. He watched the waves crash against the shore. Endless, unchanging. "No," he said finally. "But maybe we don't have to be. Maybe we just have to remember." "Remember what?" "That we made it out when we shouldn't have. And that some didn't." Danny nodded slowly. "Yeah, for them." A few weeks later, Carter was reassigned to a logistics unit preparing for the invasion of Japan. Danny was sent home for recovery. His leg never fully healed, but he could walk with a cane. They said their goodbyes on a humid morning at the airfield. Danny gripped his hand tightly. "You come home, you hear me? You've done enough fighting for both of us." Carter smiled faintly. "I'll see you back in Kansas. We'll drink, we'll dance, and you can tell Maria I kept you alive just so she'd owe me dinner." Danny laughed, pulling him into a hug. "Deal!" The engines roared to life. As the transport lifted off, Danny watched it disappear into the clouds, his heart heavy with the weight of brotherhood forged in hell. Carter never made it to the invasion of Japan. When the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August, the war ended before his unit was deployed. But just weeks later, a supply truck carrying Carter and 5 others hit an old anti-tank mine on Okinawa. The explosion tore through the jungle road, killing 3 instantly, including Carter. The telegram reached Danny 2 weeks later in San Antonio. He opened it on the porch where Maria sat sewing, her face going pale as she read the words over his shoulder. "We regret to inform you that Private First Class James Carter was killed in action on Okinawa." August 28, 1945, Danny sat in silence for a long time. The sun dipped below the horizon, crickets sang, the world kept turning. Finally, he stood, walked into the yard, and looked up at the darkening sky. "You kept your promise, Jimmy," he whispered. "Now it's my turn." Years passed. Danny married Maria, raised 2 children, and worked as a mechanic. But every year, on the anniversary of Okinawa, he wrote a letter, always addressed the same way. "To my brother Jimmy, I'm still here because you didn't leave me." I'll never forget. He never mailed them. He didn't have to. He kept them in a wooden box beside his medals. The silver star he had insisted Carter's mother receive after the war. In 1962, Danny finally returned to Okinawa. The island was peaceful now, rebuilt, green again. He found the old ridge where the battle had taken place. The caves were overgrown, the scars softened by time. He knelt in the grass and placed a single dog tag he'd worn since the day Carter died. It was Carter's. "I made it, brother," he said quietly, "just like you wanted." He stood for a long time, listening to the wind rustling through the trees. It sounded almost like rain again. Then he saluted, slow, steady, and proud, and turned to walk back toward the sea. Behind him, the tag glinted once in the sunlight before disappearing into the grass. The years rolled by quietly, as they often do after great storms. The world moved forward, faster, louder, busier, leaving the scars of war to fade under layers of time and forgetfulness. But for Daniel Ruiz, time did not erase the memories. Even after decades, he could still hear the rain on Okinawa, the endless downpour, the mud, the sound of gunfire echoing through the ridges, and the voice of his best friend yelling over the chaos, "I'm not leaving you!" By 1975, Danny was an old man. His hair had turned silver, his gait was slower, and his cane tapped softly against the wooden floors of his small workshop in San Antonio. He still worked as a mechanic, fixing cars that reminded him of the simplicity he'd longed for during the war. But on some nights, when the wind blew just right, he'd sit on the porch with a glass of whiskey and stare at the stars. The same stars he and Carter once looked up at between firefights, wondering if they'd ever see home again. Maria had passed away 5 years earlier. His children were grown, living their own lives. The house was quiet now, too quiet, except for the box. It sat in the corner of his study, an old wooden chest with a Marine Corps emblem carved into the lid. Inside were faded letters, a handful of medals, a cracked photo of 2 young soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder, and a folded American flag that had been handed to Carter's mother in 1946. Every year, Danny polished that flag, unfolded it gently, and whispered, "You kept me alive, Jimmy. I owe you every breath." One spring afternoon, a knock came at the door. Danny shuffled over and opened it to find a young man in uniform, clean-cut, nervous, maybe 25 at most. "Mr. Ruiz?" the man asked. "That's me," Danny replied. The soldier extended a hand. "I'm Lieutenant Michael Carter. My grandfather was James Carter. I think you knew him." Danny froze, gripping the edge of the doorframe for support. "Jimmy's grandson?" he murmured. "Yes, sir. My dad, his son, told me about you. Said you served together on Okinawa." For a moment, Danny couldn't speak. His throat tightened, his eyes wet. "Come in, son," he said finally. "You look just like him." They sat in the kitchen as the afternoon light filtered through the curtains. Danny poured coffee, his hands trembling slightly. "I didn't even know he had a family," Danny said softly. "He didn't, not before he left. My grandmother was pregnant when he shipped out. She never told him. He died before he knew he had a son." Danny stared down at his cup. He would have been proud. He always talked about starting a family when the war ended. Said he wanted a quiet life. Michael nodded. "That's why I wanted to meet you, sir. My father passed away last year, but before he did, he told me there was a man, a Marine, who saved my grandfather's life more than once. He said if I ever wore the uniform, I should find him and say thank you." Danny smiled faintly. "I didn't save him. He saved me." Michael frowned slightly. "But the records say—" Danny held up a hand. "Records don't tell the truth about men like Jimmy Carter. They tell you who fired, who lived, who died, but they don't tell you who refused to leave." He stood and limped toward the wooden chest in the corner. From inside, he pulled out a faded photograph. 2 young Marines standing in the mud, rifles slung, arms around each other's shoulders. Both were smiling, though their eyes already carried the weight of men who had seen too much. "This was taken a week before the ridge," Danny said, handing it to Michael. "We'd been fighting for months. I got hit bad, and Jimmy carried me through hell to get back to our lines. He didn't sleep, didn't eat, just kept going. When we got back, I told him to leave me behind if it ever happened again. He told me, 'The only way I leave you behind is if I stop breathing.'" Michael's voice softened. "And he kept his word." Danny nodded slowly. "He always did." For a long moment, neither spoke. The ticking of the old wall clock filled the silence. Then Michael reached into his bag and pulled out a small envelope. "Mr. Ruiz, before my dad passed, he asked me to give you this. He said it belonged to you as much as it did to us." Inside was a medal, the Silver Star Jimmy had been awarded posthumously. It gleamed faintly in the light. Danny's hand trembled as he touched it. "I gave this to his mother," he whispered. "Yes," Michael said. "She passed it to my father before she died. He wanted you to have it again. He said it was meant for both of you." Danny stared at the medal for a long time before closing his hand around it. "I'll keep it close," he said softly. "Just like I kept him." A year later, in 1976, Danny passed away quietly in his sleep. His daughter found him in his chair on the porch, the morning paper in his lap, and the Silver Star resting in his hand. At his funeral, the local Marine Corps detachment sent an honor guard. They folded the flag and handed it to his daughter. When they went through his belongings, they found something unusual. a sealed envelope addressed simply, "To the family of Private First Class James Carter." Inside was a letter written in shaky handwriting. "Dear Carter family, it's been over 30 years since Okinawa, but not a day passes that I don't think of Jimmy. He wasn't just my brother in arms. He was my brother in heart. When everyone else would have run, he stayed. When hope was gone, he found some. I lived a full life because he gave me that chance. I'm not sure what heaven looks like, but I like to think it's quiet, green, and far from war. Maybe he's there now, leaning against a tree, waiting for me to show up late like always. If you ever wonder who he was, remember this. He was the man who refused to leave. Semper Fi, Corporal Daniel Ruiz, USMC, decades later. The story of James Carter and Daniel Ruiz resurfaced through an article written by a military historian researching unsung heroes of the Pacific War. The story spread quickly, shared among veterans groups, history forums, and eventually, documentary filmmakers. In 2015, a small monument was unveiled at the Okinawa Peace Memorial Park. It stood not far from where Carter had carried Ruiz through the rain 70 years earlier. The stone was simple, gray granite, polished smooth. It read, "In honor of Private First Class James Carter and Corporal Daniel Ruiz, United States Marine Corps, who showed the world that brotherhood is stronger than fear." During the ceremony, a group of Marines in dress blues stood at attention. Among them was Lieutenant Colonel Michael Carter, the grandson of the man who had never come home. As the last note of taps echoed over the sea, he placed a small metal box at the base of the monument. Inside were the 2 dog tags, one belonging to James Carter, the other to Daniel Ruiz. He stepped back, saluted, and whispered. They finally made it home. The crowd fell silent as the wind picked up, rustling the trees. The sound was soft, almost like distant rain. For a moment, everyone felt it. That connection between the past and present, between sacrifice and peace, between 2 friends who had refused to be separated, even by death. And though their names would never be as famous as the generals or the battles they fought in, their story lived on, not in the pages of textbooks, but in the hearts of those who understood that war, at its core, isn't about hate or victory. It's about love. Love for a brother. Love for a friend. Love strong enough to carry one through fire and bring him home. The sun dipped low over the Pacific, bathing the memorial in golden light. Waves crashed gently against the rocks below. And somewhere, in that endless silence, 2 brothers in arms finally found peace together, side by side, where they had always belonged.